Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk about the varied start positions in the game and how they haven't really ended up working in the best possible fashion in a lot of cases. There are certainly some situations where a varied start position in a particular race can work and does work, but there's also plenty of examples where it doesn't work. And I'm going to cover both of these. And let's start by talking about Teclis of the High Elves. Teclis has generally been one of the worst legendary lords of the High Elves ever since he was introduced in Warhammer 2. In the lore, Teclis is a major character for the High Elves, arguably the most important character for the High Elves. He is the guy that gets the wheels moving. He is a guy with a significant amount of influence, not just among the High Elves, but also among many races in the world. We're talking about Empire, we're talking about Dwarves, we're talking about other races as well. Teclis gets things done. And yet, ever since he was introduced in Warhammer 2, his campaign has been like, oh, throw him on the ass end of Lustria and have him deal with everything there. In Warhammer 3, he starts over here in the Southlands, just north of Kairos Fateweaver. I mean, he started very close to Kairos Fateweaver before they changed Kairos' position because it was quite miserable. And now he just starts north of Kairos Fateweaver, which is not really a great campaign dynamic. Now, to be clear, Teclis is a pretty solid lord. It's not his faction effects that are the issue, though to be clear, Tyrion, Alariel, and Elfarion are just flat out better in many ways, but having a recruit rank of +5 for Lore Master of Hoeth, Mages, and Archmages is certainly not something to sneeze at. The diplomacy benefit also is certainly very powerful as well, because the High Elves do benefit from that diplomacy benefit in a significant way, since it will help them achieve trade agreements. But it just doesn't end up working. The reason it doesn't end up working is because of a particular issue that does affect the High Elves. This is an issue that affects Emmerich as well. See, the issue for the High Elves is that Ulthuan is so very significant in a campaign that not having access to Ulthuan for your campaign is an enormous downside for the purposes of that particular campaign experience. There's so many landmarks that are really solid, really strong, and will give you a significant amount of benefits. While it is annoying as Emmerich, Elfarion, and even Teclis to get access to Ulthuan, the benefits are so significant that you can't ignore them. But you're on the other side of the planet, so getting back to Ulthuan is a journey in and of itself. It is not great for Elfarion, and Emmerich will at least get the ability of confederating factions, or in Elfarion's case, he starts with Oraf. In Emmerich's case, he can confederate Kalador. In Teclis' case, he has no option. Like, it's kind of hilarious, like Saffrey, which Teclis is kind of supposed to control. Saffrey, somewhat, it's more complicated, but the issue with Saffrey, you end up in this kind of situation where Saffrey just gets wiped out by Tyrion and Alariel. Well, maybe not so much right now, but for the longest time in Warhammer 3, that would happen. Kind of ridiculous to see the High Elves fighting each other. I mean, it did happen in the end times, but that was because of a certain circumstances created by Teclis. So that is one of the problems. The other issue that has existed for a very, very long time in certain campaigns that are spread out like this is victory conditions. Now, Teclis' victory conditions are not too horrible. He does need to control 6 special settlements over here. It isn't too bad, though having to make your way to the Great Earth Isle is not a particularly great example. It was kind of bad when you might have gotten a victory condition to wipe out the Dark Elves, but Teclis' victory conditions at least make sense. What doesn't make sense is when you have a victory condition for Lokir, for instance, who starts all the way here in Cathay, and his victory condition is to wipe out all of the High Elves, including Emmerich and including Teclis, which is not a great campaign experience. So Lokir doesn't work because of his distance over there. Though, keep in mind, Lokir is a substantially better campaign than Teclis because Cathay is great, Lokir is a great lord, he gets shit done. It just, you end up in this kind of situation where you're on the other side of the planet, you still have to deal with the same kind of objectives that, say, someone like Malekith would have to deal with. And by the way, these kind of distant starts for certain legendary lords, they create issues for those campaigns as well. Like, imagine playing a Dark Elven campaign where you have to go and wipe out Teclis on the other freaking side of the planet, far away from Wolf One, because that makes sense somehow. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand that. Like, in a long campaign, having to make your way to Teclis just to kill him and only him, whereas you don't really care about the territory along the way at all, is not really a great campaign experience in any substantial shape or form. So this varied start position situation that we do have in many cases just doesn't work. Another example I can give you is Brindle. Now, I understand Brindle's starting position. I understand that Brindle has a beef with Malekith. But one, it just doesn't make sense for his character because his character is not so much about his beef with Malekith. His character is about protecting the dwarves, showing up in their worst time. Something like, the mechanic that Oxyatl has in a campaign would work very well for Brindle. But he doesn't have that, which ends up limiting his campaign. And Brindle is the best legendary lord of the dwarves by far. His blue skill line, his special skill line, his faction effects, they're all really good. But because of his starting position, because Creative Assembly was trying to push for this variety, it ends up falling flat on its face. There are some other examples as well, like why is Volkmar in the Southlands fighting with Khemri as the Empire? I can't explain it. There's so many issues. Now, those are situations where it doesn't work. Are there cases where it does work? Yes, surprisingly so, there are cases where it does work. Krokar over here in the Southlands actually does work. Tic-Tac-Toe is not too bad either over here in the Southlands. Two campaigns where they're far away from Lustria, but they actually do end up having a fairly decent experience, as much as you can get one with a Lizardman at the very least. That is certainly a great one. Or Eon Bow. So varied campaign starts can work. That's not the problem. The problem is, in some cases, they don't. Like, consider Alberic. Let's look at Alberic, a really bad campaign start. On one hand, you do get the benefit with vows for Alberic if you do play his campaign, so because you can get a vow, the second vow specifically, the questing vow, can be unlocked for a siege battle in a jungle or desert. Well, if you're in the jungle, you're going to do that. But he then gets an objective to go take Sartosa, which is on the other side of the ocean. Yeah, that's not a really great campaign experience and a great campaign dynamic that we do have. Or Rakarth. Now, Rakarth is not quite as horrible. He does have some sea lanes available in his particular campaign that he can make work. Like, for instance, you can take this sea lane and then travel over here to end up right here. Or just travel north from his starting position. Though, I probably would argue that taking the sea lane would be better. And then you end up taking this one and end up north over here near Malekith. By the way, how does that sea lane exactly make sense? I don't know. I don't think it really does make sense in any way, shape, or form. But there are these kind of campaigns that are just illogical, nonsensical. And let's not ignore Katep. Like, Katep is the ultimate expression of a campaign where a varied start really ends up working very poorly. See, Katep is not a bad legendary lord. In fact, he's incredibly powerful. He has a lot of mages. He has an artillery piece as a mount that is fucking extraordinary. But his campaign victory conditions do require him to go back to Khemri, which is as miserable as you might think, considering all the things that are going to happen in Khemri. Worse still, if, as a Tomb King, he's actually going to end up having to fight Cetra, which is kind of miserable. Like, I feel like a Katep campaign would be far more interesting if his victory conditions would not involve that. Like, if they involved, I don't know, beating up Morathi, which, by the way, you have to do in a campaign because she has a Book of Nagash in her settlement and you can't gain those for diplomacy. Kind of shame because the Tomb Kings can get along well with everyone else, but hey, you have to fight Morathi. Not a great campaign dynamic. Now, why did Creative Assembly do all of this? Why did Creative Assembly introduce all these varied starts? Why did they push them so hard to the point that they broke the game in a lot of ways? Well, it has to do with a lot of the criticism Creative Assembly did get, rightfully so, when Warhammer 1 did launch. See, with Warhammer 1, one of the things that Creative Assembly was heavily criticized for was the fact that Ungrim, for instance, started in the same position as Thorgrim, that Gelt started in the same position as Karl Franz, that Kellner started in the same position as Manfred. That you had all of these campaigns, but you had no variety. Now, there's an argument to be made in favor of faction variety, because if you have two Legendary Lords, and this did happen quite a lot in Warhammer 1 in particular, if you have two Legendary Lords sharing a start position, or even in Warhammer 3, you have two Legendary Lords very close to each other, Catherine and Castaltin as an example, as a great example, then really people are just going to gravitate towards the Legendary Lord that just flat out better, because it's the same kind of campaign situation, it's the same race, there's some different faction effects, but you're just going to choose the one that's better. Like, why would you play ever a campaign as Catherine as opposed to Castaltin? He's just a flat-out better Legendary Lord than her. He has better campaign situation, and you can confederate other. He has a better, like, consider Catherine and Castaltin. He has a better city. He has a better starting situation because he can deal with Azazel early on in the campaign and doesn't have to worry about Azag and Dryka ruining his day. He can get access... he can take the entirety of the province here and then help it out and eliminate it. I mean, ultimately, even Catra and Castaltin are meaningless because you have Boris Ursus, who's the ultimate Kislev campaign that is substantially better than both of them combined. So why would you bother ever playing a campaign as Castaltin or Catherine when you can play a campaign as Boris Ursus? So there is an obvious downside with the Legendary Lord sharing a position when some are just substantially better than others. But then we consider the Wolf one. Like, we consider the counterexample where we have Legendary Lords very close to each other, Tyrion and Alariel and Elfarion, very close to each other, but there's significant benefits to playing as either of them. You can play a great campaign as Tyrion, you can play a great campaign as Alariel, and you can play a great campaign as an Elfarion. They're all great Legendary Lords. They have a good amount of power, even though they're sharing the same kind of starting position. Sure, if you play an Elfarion campaign, you'll start in a fleet by the coast over here by Gromty, but you will have control of Torre Vrest, and it's probably worth keeping control of Torre Vrest, I would point out. So when you are playing a campaign in Ulf 1 as the High Elves, regardless of who you choose to play, the campaign experience is varied, it's interesting, and it's not the exact same experience as one of them. That's the problem for Kislev, that's the problem for Gelt and Karl Franz, that's the problem that Manfred and Kemmler had, and then Gorst and Vlad did have, because, yeah, not a great dynamic there. So there's an argument for, there's an argument against. You can make it work both ways. And it kind of does in some situations, like Grimgor, Azag do work. Warzag doesn't quite work. Skarsnik certainly doesn't work. Grom, he works for short term, not so much long term because of the climate situation. Those are some of the problems that we have over here. I understand the variety argument. I do. Especially after Warhammer 1. But Creative Assembly went too far from my perspective and never considered that maybe some campaigns sharing a start position or being in close proximity to each other isn't necessarily too big of a problem. That's where I stand on this issue. Costin, signing out.